Hi, welcome to EMDR with Alice. So, I'm about to start a new series that I'm excited to bring to you, and that's around how to use the Enneagram in your EMDR work. And so, today we're just going to do some intro into that, and then the next couple episodes will focus on utilizing EMDR and Enneagram work. So first, I'd like to offer, I'm not an Enneagram instructor. I don't have formal training in Enneagram. I have spent the last 7 or 8 years studying the Enneagram. I've read several books. I've spent lots of hours listening to trainings and podcasts, but I am not certified in any way. So I do want to offer that caveat here. But I have found just through my understanding of the Enneagram that it has really helped my lens of seeing what's coming into my office when I'm working with clients, specifically when I'm doing target sequencing and even recognizing where people are getting stuck in their trauma. And a lot of it can be tied to what's going on with their Enneagram or their personality type is another way to think about that. If you're not familiar with Enneagram and that this is something new to you, a good place to start might be picking up a couple of just primers on the Enneagram. I really like Beatrice Chestnut's work. She has some really great information around Enneagram and does a good job explaining that. And then I also really like and refer to clients to The Road Back to You by Ian Morgan Cron and Suzanne Stabile. I really like both of their podcasts. They're very helpful. I'll also say they don't know me and that I don't get any kind of compensation for referring to them. So I do want to say and offer that. But let's just talk about how could it be useful. So first of all, if I have a client that comes in, one of the things I do ask is if they happen to know their Enneagram number. And if they do, then I do bring it into and utilize it in the session. If they don't know what I'm talking about. I don't really spend time on that unless they seem like they have an interest in learning about it. But it is a way for people to understand their self a little bit better. And we can begin to recognize and understand patterns that are showing up for them, and that certain Enneagram numbers might have certain go-to patterns even in their trauma responses. So maybe let's start there today and just kind of beginning to recognize where patterns can come up. Now, I'm going to offer patterns, but again, people are really unique and different, and there might be people that don't fit into some of the things I'm going to say, and that's okay too. I always just think about this as maybe a helpful tool that might expedite for some people the work that we're going to be doing and help them understand themselves a little bit better. So let's talk about kind of trauma responses and what we might see show up, kind of working around the different numbers in the Enneagram. So one of the things to understand with the Enneagram is the orientation to time with the different numbers. And that can play a big role in both what you experience in the session, what the client is experiencing in their symptoms, but also in their trauma responses. And so let's work first with our ones. Our 1s, 2s, and 6s, orientation to time is present moment, which means they're going to be fixated or stuck in the present moment and can get overwhelmed by the present moment. And so what that might look like in your session is these are individuals that might get flooded more easily in your sessions. Even in EMDR processing, I'll just kind of be aware that these are folks that might get more overwhelmed or flooded in the present moment experience of what's happening right now. These are also folks that might come in and they get distracted by the present moment that's happening in their life now and have a harder time focusing when we're trying to go back and do some historical work. They can get overwhelmed by what's happening, and they might be more likely to come in with crisis of the week or relational drama that's taking place in their current life, and be less likely to want to focus on doing some of the work that maybe we previously agreed upon in session. understanding that and knowing that, having conversations with these particular clients on the front end about that might be a tendency could be really helpful and useful, so that you might be able to move forward in your treatment process a little bit more smoothly if you're able to catch that on the front end. So another orientation to time to really pay attention to would be your 3s, 7s, and 8s, who their orientation to time is the future. So these are individuals that might have a harder time actually talking about their past. These are folks that will more likely say things like, well, the past doesn't necessarily, that's the past. Like, why are we even talking about that or focusing on that? Because their orientation to time is the future, and they're more worried and concerned about where they're going than where they've been. And so spending a little bit of time around the science behind how networks are created and developed, and how the past triggers or even exacerbates triggers of our present and things we experience in the future because of those past experiences. I've also found, and we'll dive into this a little bit deeper when I'm doing target sequencing with folks that are 3s, 7s, and 8s, they may have a harder time going back to touchstone memories. And so we'll kind of talk about that in another episode of how do you do that. But just recognizing, maybe if you're like you have a client that they don't seem like they have dissociative patterns, and they don't seem like they're cutting off from their past, but they just have a hard time identifying past memories or even remembering things from their past to even put on the target sequence. It may not necessarily be dissociation or blocking that's happening. It could be their orientation to time and part of their personality style. And so we'll talk about how to kind of work with that on another episode. And then the last one that we kind of we want to look at with orientation to time would be your 4s, 5s, and 9s, which orientation to time is in the past. And depending on which number we're in with that, you can these individuals actually might be more historical. They're able to actually identify a lot from the past, and they might even have more robust of a kind of a target sequence list, because that's where they're oriented, and they remember a lot more, and they're hurt by a lot of more things from the past, and maybe even can appear to be more stuck in regrets and resentment because of those past experiences. And so understanding that, again, helping people kind of recognize that's actually kind of their go-to way, that is how they are, the way that they are oriented, is how it's showing up, right? It's how it's showing up for them. And the way that they are trying to maybe stuck in or trying to process things that have happened to them may get stuck because of their orientation to time. And so looking at trauma responses then from these, right? So your folks that are more oriented to the present moment might get more stuck in freeze response. And then your folks that are more oriented to future they may show up more with the flight or fight response. Particularly your 8s and your 7s are going to show up in a more of a fight response. 3s could show up in fight, but we see more maybe of a flight response with them. And then the freeze and flight might be more of what you might see show up with a 1, a 2, or a 6. And so just being able to recognize that could be really helpful. And then with your past orientation to time, sometimes what overwhelm can really look like is dissociation. And we see that quite a bit with 9s and 4s. It's just a go-to way that their system seems to kind of deal with the overwhelm of something when something's happening, or something difficult, being with something difficult and hard, that seems to be more of a go-to way. So understanding trauma responses according to Enneagram number and orientation to time can be a useful start as we begin to help the client begin to connect back to themselves after they've experienced trauma. I also think about it as just that self-compassion journey as we begin to understand ourselves more and hold more compassion for just the way that we're designed and the way that we move through the world, and seeing how trauma impacts that. So that's our first kind of introduction into Enneagram and the EMDR, and we have more to come in the future, and I'm excited to bring that to you. Thanks for joining today, and take care.